Hello and welcome to Chats, a television podcast, Season 14, The Chatzovers. On this season of Chats, we're covering the HBO drama, The Leftovers. My name is Allen, and I'm joined by Magellan.
Hey, I'm still here. I'm still left
over.
Still left.
I'm still standing. Why don't they play I'm Still Standing in The Leftovers? I want more badly timed, inappropriate music cues. Because people are still standing after the event.
I still sometimes get The Leftovers mixed up in my head with those books that I told you I got it mixed
Left
up with.
Behind.
Yeah, those like kind of weird Christian-y books.
Yeah, that got made into the really bad movies, I think.
Mm-hmm.
16 novels, jeez.
Wow. Religious novels by Tim LaHaye and Jerry B. Jenkins. 7-year conflict between the Tribulation Force, an underground network of converts, and the New World Order-esque global community and its leader, Nikolai Carpathia, who is also the Antichrist. Got it.
Well, the way you said "wow" right there reminded me of John Bellion in False Alarms. Wow.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Very deep cut.
Yeah, that's a Lawrence song. Listen to the end of the John Bellion verse in the Lawrence song, False Alarms. It sounds like he's having a genuine reaction in the studio to the return of the chorus after his verse.
Wow.
He's like, wow.
It's fantastic.
You really came in there. Anyway, we're not talking about Left Behind or Lawrence.
Or the Leftovers, new episodes at least. We're talking about the Leftovers as a whole so far.
Yeah, I'm at the time that you're listening to this, I'm abroad. And we wanted to at least have one feed filler. We're going to have 2 Sundays where we're not doing new episodes. So this week is kind of a feed filling discussion bridge between the seasons. And then next Sunday we'll, I think, put out like a Patreon episode or something like that.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out. And then we'll have new discussions of season 3 in 2 weeks from when you're listening to this.
September is when the Chatzovers is beginning our coverage of season 3 of The Leftovers, which I'm so excited about because we've never watched it. I know basically nothing about it. But before we get into the final season of The Leftovers, we thought we would stretch our legs a little bit and talk about some of the writing surrounding The Leftovers at the time that season 2 finished airing, And basically this discussion will be broken down into a couple of different parts. It's going to be a briefer episode, but we want to talk about how The Leftovers was perceived in 2015, what writers of the time we're talking about, how we perceive The Leftovers in 2022, what we think about how it relates to our current world, and this sort of perception that The Leftovers is a, quote, literary show or a great show, what makes it this like TV critic darling and how it's ended up like that, and what specifically is it doing better than other shows. And then also just comparing the 2 seasons that we've seen so far. And it seems generally agreed that season 2 is a lot better than season 1. And we want to tackle why that is and what we think about that whole situation. Sound good, Miguel?
Sounds great.
Fab. Well, a lot of our discussion today is going to be based on 4 articles that I picked and curated for us. And I'm going to link all these in the show notes, of course. The first of which is an article from The Guardian in 2015 called How the Leftovers Became Watchable, the show didn't change, the world did. Which basically asserts that the show, it's talking about what The Leftovers meant to this person and meant to people in 2015. And it includes quotes from Damon Lindelof and talks about Lost and all the other things that The Leftovers is pulling from, as it relates to the fears of people in 2015. And I found this one really fascinating because, it seems so obvious when we started covering The Leftovers to say this is a pandemic show, right? This is, what we think about. And so it's, one of the unique, beautiful things about the internet is that you get snapshots of different periods of time. And so all of this discussion in this article is about, The Leftovers is based on the worries around things like school shooting, and The Leftovers book was based on the Bush era and evangelical Christians. And it's I don't know. It's what did you think about this piece, first of all?
Yeah, this is one that really engaged me in thinking about how to talk about this. And also, I'll just say, I listened to about 40 minutes of a Leftovers podcast episode discussing the season 2 finale from 2015, a show called Following the Leftovers from, I think they're called baldmove.com or something. It seems like they do a lot of TV podcast seasons, but just to give credit where credit is due. And I'm really interested in retrieving the context of the Leftovers in 2015 because, like you said, it's so colored at this point by our experience of COVID that it's hard for me to understand it as something different, and I really want to. And it was like reading this article, I was like, oh, that's what you're thinking of? Like,
yeah.
Okay. I wasn't really getting that, but I guess that makes sense. It's just so wild to see a headline from 2015 say the show didn't change, the world did.
Right.
Because I don't, at this point, I think of 2015 as like the last good year, you know?
Absolutely.
It's not the case. Plenty of, mass violence and unrest and tension over, starting to see, I think, publicly tension over racial issues that only became more pronounced and violent under the Trump administration. So there's plenty of material for the Leftovers to be responding to. But it's just wild to me that it responds to that material in such a way that makes it such a fitting show for 2020, 2021, 2022, as we talked about when we piloted it and as we've been covering it.
What's the most bananas part about this article?
What's that?
We live in a world, this is a paragraph I'm going to read. We live in a world where what's, quote, not allowed to happen happens constantly. There have been more mass shootings in 2015 than there have been days in the year. So many that a 17-year-old girl who has survived 2 in a month can be described as a veteran, which that number has, all the numbers regarding mass shootings have only increased. You'd be a fool not to hear hysteria creeping into the conversation. In the U.S. alone, the political conversation has become so heated that the Republican frontrunner has been labeled a fascist. Which, boom, fuck, whoa, where are we? I feel like I'm waking up from a dream reading this article or something.
Yeah.
That's Donald Trump, you guys. Right.
That quote links to a Slate article by Jamel Bouie from November of 2015 called "Donald Trump is a Fascist."
Which
thank you, Jamel Bouie, for being so clear-eyed about that in 2015.
Appreciate you, Jamel.
Not everybody was.
Nope.
Yeah.
And it's just the fears and talking about how Damon Lindelof mentioned that he was worried about things like Dylan Roof and how he went into a church in South, a prayer group, and then proceeded to shoot everybody in this church, and how that breaks, quote, the fundamental rules of his God construct, how that's not allowed to happen. And what I think ultimately I get from this article and from reading about the Leftovers in 2015 is that we will always find meaning however we want in the art that we consume, whether it's it seems completely crafted and curated for today. And people are saying the same thing 7 years ago or 6 years ago, whenever this article came out. And that's just going to be a universal thing. 50 years down the line, people are going to say, wow, the Leftovers predicted the end of society. So, it always works.
Yeah, I think the thing that I'm realizing about myself as a viewer of the Leftovers is, so this article in the preview underneath the headline says once deemed too depressing to watch. And I have not thought of the Leftovers as it's obviously a bleak show or it's dealing with trauma, but I have not necessarily seen it as oh my God, this show is so depressing. And I think what I'm realizing is the reason for that is if I had watched it in 2015, this sort of stuff definitely felt more raw. I mean, even remembering the day after Trump was elected in 2016 and going to work the next day and people are crying at work and I'm feeling this sense of dread, and it's 2016, the stuff hadn't even happened yet. And the stuff that we knew was going to happen, the stuff that we didn't know was going to happen. Right. And in 2015, there was just this overwhelming sense of dread that I think we've become, unfortunately, very accustomed to in 2022. And also we've gone through a kind of society altering, norms shaking thing like COVID. And what I've noticed about myself as a viewer is it's much easier for me to digest a show like The Leftovers and like somewhat detach myself from feeling the show in order to like think the show,
right,
for better and for worse. And I think also something that is funny to me about kind of the COVID situation is the ways in which society has been scrambling to like return to normalcy in the wake of COVID, and how in some ways like it doesn't feel all that different, post COVID, in the way that The Leftovers, like things feel fundamentally altered. I don't know. So it's just interesting to kind of have gone obviously COVID's much different than The Departure, fewer casualties stretched across a longer period of time. There are a lot of other externalities and complications that come with a pandemic versus like a blip moment. So it's a different thing. But, now that we have like a real world context to compare The Leftovers to, it in a way kind of, I don't know, takes away some of the mystique of it, or some of the like kind of, that sort of part of the drama. I don't know, in a way that I think is useful, but also it's interesting to see people talk about it who don't have that context,
Yeah, they couldn't have possibly known. And
yeah,
I think my last big thing about this section is just that this is 2015, and so they didn't know about a lot of things that were going to happen to the country and to the world. And so reading this article also kind of felt like watching the Garveys at their best, in that I was like, and one of the later articles does talk about that episode a bit, and how you just don't know when you're in it that you're doing well, or that things are good, even when they don't feel like they are. And at the same time, the truth is that maybe things weren't always peachy and perfect, and things like the pandemic and things like The Departure just unearthed anxieties that were already present in the world. And I think that talks a lot about that is talked a lot about in this next piece that I wanted to transition to, which is a wonderful essay by Michael Colbert called "The Leftovers is Teaching Me Who I Want to Be After COVID," which was written in 2021, and thankfully doesn't spoil season 3, so we made sure of that.
Yep.
This article choked me up, straight up. I'm a big sucker for pieces that like get really personal and manage to connect people's lives to the media that they consume. That's something we're always kind of trying to do with Chats, even though we still take a like slightly distanced perspective. But I think Colbert here manages to like inject his own life into the worries around the pandemic, and how The Leftovers was sort of cathartic for him in a way that really, really worked for me. Because it's really scary, talking about like we've tried to connect our beliefs and our feelings around this show to COVID, and sometimes it doesn't always like track evenly. Even just within the context of season 1, he manages to find a lot of solace and comfort in watching other characters figure out who they are after the event. And like connecting that to his routines, and like meeting people and coming out of a relationship and realizing things about himself that he needed to work through in therapy. I was really gravitated towards this one because it's like, it's so hard sometimes to connect your life to your media. Even like when it works, it's the best feeling in the world. It's a beautiful thing, but I can't do that with every single show that I watch. And I thought this was just really great connecting the anxieties we have to the characters.
Yeah, the sort of dominant theme in this piece, and the author here arrives at this sentence talking about Kevin. As the show evolves, so too does Kevin. He embraces the parts of his mind that scare him. He tackles his problems head on. Here I find some peace, a radical acceptance of uncertainty. And that's a theme that, in reflecting on this article, reading it, and on myself this year, I kind of independently came to a similar goal or theme for myself for 2022, which is this idea of like, you don't know where life is going to go. Like that being one of the kind of glib learnings of COVID is who knows what's going to happen. And even in the wake of this kind of event or tragedy, it's not as if like, okay, that's it. And now we're in a new state of affairs that is stable. Now you're in a world that has like all of these little things that are different. And are they going to return to the way they were? Or are they going to stay different? And being able to live in that uncertainty is like kind of a fundamental both survival mechanism of like a post-pandemic society.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also beyond being a survival mechanism. When you can fully internalize it, it becomes like almost this beautiful form of resilience that, we see Kevin at the end of season 2 arrive on the other side of all this uncertainty with his non-traditional family gathering there at the end. And it was really beautiful to see this article express what it feels like to move through uncertainty like that and arrive kind of back where you were, but where you were is fundamentally different, and that's okay.
Wherever you are, that's where you are. Yeah, and I think to agree, where I agree with this article especially is that the leftovers in season 1, other people saying at the time it's too depressing. I think the leftovers season 1 just like hits better when you have suffered a little bit or when you have gone through something similar, and that's why it like that pilot hit us so hard. But season 2, especially towards its end, and what I imagine season 3 is going to tackle is like, okay, you've changed, but you also haven't changed, but you clearly have acknowledged that there is change that needs to happen. What does that look like? And how do you come out of that? What do you look like when you learn from your mistakes and try to be a better person? What does a good father, Kevin Garvey, look like? What does he consider to be his like satisfaction in life with his family and all of that? I think in all of that, I started thinking about like who Kevin was in the pilot also, and like how different even at the end of season 2 he was from the pilot. Which allows us to talk about the sort of spectrum of the show and this really great review/reanalysis of the pilot, which is called The Leftovers Pilot, Television Turns Literary. Yes.
Sorry, before we move past this article, I just want to point to something that I'm finding interesting about how we've talked about The Leftovers that's confirmed by how this article talks about it, which is like there's all this intention from Parada and Lindelof to make The Leftovers a show about religion, and it just isn't really, right? Yeah. Like it doesn't capably, I think, say anything all that interesting about religion. And, there's some cool imagery or ideas around like cults as proto-religions or whatever. And I know that they had Reza Aslan as like a consultant on the show to help firm some of those things up. Mm-hmm. But like at this point in our societal context, people aren't taking those things from it. And I think it's kind of to the show's benefit as a post-COVID show that it doesn't really do the religion stuff or like the guilty remnant stuff in a super coherent way. Because here in this article, the author's really focusing on the kind of behaviors of characters, or the habits they fall into, or the things that they turn to, and talks about the guilty remnant in terms of like the actions that a guilty remnant member takes, like smoking or joining an organization or taking a vow of silence or whatever, more about the individual stuff and less about the kind of like structural organizational characteristics of the guilty remnant as some kind of stand-in for proto-religion. And I think that's really interesting in comparing 2015 to 2022, because for me, in a lot of ways, like I don't really think of COVID and people's societal response to COVID as particularly religiously informed, if that makes sense. And maybe I'm wrong, but it feels like sense. People responded to it along political boundaries and talked about COVID and how they reacted to it in terms of like, you should wear a mask because it's like for the good of all people, versus like I shouldn't have to wear a mask because it's my own liberty and my own choice. And like it didn't really provoke a lot of sort of doom and gloom biblical talk or shifts in the spiritual landscape of our country necessarily. Do you think that that's the case too, or do you have a different read on religion and COVID, I guess?
Yeah, I have a slightly different read as the more religious person of the two of us.
Yeah.
If anything, there have been acts of violence perpetuated under the banner of religion during the pandemic and before. So, like, that's not a thing that's really changed. Maybe it's happened more frequently because of the structures of society. But for me and for what people I know, religion has been a way to reunite after the pandemic, or after the main like waves of the pandemic, because it's a unique space for people to find each other, to speak with each other, to bond with each other. Is churches and church groups and online forums where people talk about their faith and stuff. Like that's what a lot of people have realized is, oh, I am lonely and I like seek comfort in other people and in a greater power. I turn to religion for that community. It's a really underrated part of religion, I think, is its ability to foster community where other things can't.
Yeah, definitely.
Because there's just a lot of things, a lot of structures of community that were broken down by the pandemic, like physical meeting spaces and like even classrooms. And so like having religion is something that, on a higher spiritual sense than what our bodies are allowed to engage with, brought people together more, I think. But I don't think
like
that
the perspective on it.
Thank you. And I don't think that the pandemic has I don't think that there have been too many like God said that I don't have to wear a mask type of people. But also we come at this from a slightly skewed perspective, both being from like northeastern United States.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's been like some people. I'm feeling like I'm remembering some signs at some stupid fucking whatever.
Yeah.
But like, Trumpism kind of became its own cultish, religious-y thing. And it's interesting how that, like, whatever. I don't want to give too much weight to Trump himself, but he kind of spearheaded or made like permissible a certain brand of conservatism that was very like still in existence, but very like brutish and not necessarily concerned with, I don't know, religion as like a manner of rhetoric or a manner of speaking.
Yeah.
So maybe if COVID had happened during the Bush era, it would have looked more like Tom Perrotta's imagining of what this sort of society could look like.
Exactly.
But I'm interested to see season 3 being the only season to come out in the Trump era post election. I don't know when it was being produced. I don't know when it was being produced though. But certainly they were at least producing it in the throes of like the 2016 election, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder what that looks like, or if that shapes season 3 at all.
I have to imagine some part of its production happened during season. Yeah. Final season began principal photography in early May 2016. Ooh.
Okay. So like the height of the campaign.
Maybe not writing, but shooting and producing was all in the heat of it. Yes.
In the midst of when we were about to get Pokemon go to the polls for the primaries.
Bing bong, my friend. Bing bong. Do you want to take it back to a simpler time? Back to the pilot again?
Mm-hmm.
Fred Venturini, in June of 2017, re-examined The Leftovers pilot in his article, Television Turns Literary. And I recommended this one because, I still think that The Leftovers pilot is one of the strongest pilots out there. And I think that this article does a good job of, like, examining the pilot from the perspective of how far everybody's come and how a lot of its most clever little choices come from things that we understand later. And this writer is clearly a Lost fan like I am and makes a lot of connections back to Lost. And so I appreciated that, like, they know that these two things were in conversation with each other a little bit. Not only The Leftovers in its later seasons, but also Lindelof and Company's other work. What did you think? So, like, the pilot, right? The detail from this article that I was like, holy crap, there's like so much stuff in this pilot that I've not stopped thinking about was the photograph of the Garvey family. Yeah, so the section that he has about how different people approach the picture of the Garvey family makes clear to me what I like so much about The Leftovers, which is that little moments, little like on page simple moments really unravel into deep, like profound meaning when you think about them a little bit more.
Mhm.
Like Kevin breaks that photo with the intent of taking Lori out of the picture and maintaining the rest of his family, but all he can do is break up the family because he breaks the glass. And meanwhile, Jill, when she comes and sees the photo later at the end of the pilot, is attempting to reassemble it around Lori because she believes that Lori is the one keeping the family together. Love that. And I love that there's like so much subtlety that it's hard sometimes to recommend a show like The Leftovers because you don't think about that stuff too much when you're watching the pilot for the very first time. You're just like, damn, like that seems like Kevin's really violent and maybe Jill wants this family back together. But it's like a little bit more deep than that. I think that this ties to the point though that we're going to make for this section, which is that The Leftovers is often seen as a literary show, and not only because it's adapted from a book, but because it borrows the language and the symbolism of something that's traditionally reserved for fiction, or for not fiction, but for literature.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the thing that I'm kind of curious about with regard to this is just The Leftovers' reputation as like this critical darling of a show that I think is very much the case in the pilot. And like, as far as I am aware, the conversation about The Leftovers throughout its run was, this show is incredible. It's one of the best on TV. And I'm just interested in talking about that and maybe segueing into the last article as well, because I haven't had the thought in watching it like this is one of the best shows of all time. But in stepping back and thinking about how it's composed and some of the things that are talked about in this pilot, in this article about the pilot, it's like clearly a very intricate show that is one of the more masterful productions that I think we've watched. It's just sort of a weird question of like, what does it mean for a show to be one of the best, most prestigious shows ever? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the only way that I can like square that circle is when people say it's the best, they mean maybe it's the best for what they're looking for. The goal of art in a big way is to make people feel things and to convince you to feel things and to empathize with you and to engender empathy. And The Leftovers does all of those things in spades. But also there is great TV that isn't there to like make you empathize, but it's just there to make you feel comfortable and feel safe. Like sitcoms, for example, a lot of times are just like, don't you want to feel the stability of a nice family unit? And so in a way, The Leftovers is this like inversion of that, of like, hey, not everybody's family unit is exactly cohesive or, you know, traditional. And that can be because of external events. It doesn't mean that you are a broken family and it's your fault. It means that, well, the Garveys they very well could have been a stable, like, 4-person family for their entire lives. But something happened and now they're trying to pick up the pieces. And, like, that is something that a lot of people can actually relate to and feel much more than the usual thing on TV. So I think in a way, what makes the show one of the greats to people is it's bucking a trend, so to speak.
Definitely.
Let's look at a really fucked up family, so to speak, and say, I guess my family also has problems, but we can still end season 2 with like family, both nuclear and non-nuclear, and say, wow, this is family to me. And that's what's really beautiful about it. And it's like, and this is challenging with Lost too, and that's why I keep talking about it, is you have to look at it from the broad perspective, like from the zoomed out perspective of the whole series. I think season 2 works because of season 1, because you watch this family struggle, and now they figure out why struggling isn't the way forward. But that pilot in isolation makes you feel things and keep these things in your brain so that you're always thinking about them as you watch more of the show. And like that's the power of TV, baby. You think about something one week, and then a week later, you're like, oh my god, everything I knew is wrong. Everything I knew is useful, but not the same. It's pretty sick if you ask me.
Definitely.
You want to hit our last article?
I do, yeah.
This is a TV review from Maureen Ryan. The Leftovers hits a high point in season 2. This article particularly focuses on International Assassin and the arc of season 2 up to this episode. Maureen Ryan, a great TV writer. I wanted to include some of her work, and this is a good one. So, a lot of it is about how like International Assassin brings empathy back to the leftovers and brings a like apex of understanding and like hearing and loving other people, which is what the show needed. And I think that is my answer for why International Assassin is my favorite episode of the series so far, at least. It's like, it seems like a really wacky, symbolic poetry episode, but it's also like, hey, at the end of the day, the funniest thing in this episode is the Neosporin guy, because that's like a moment of warmth and comedy at the same time. And by now, like by the end of season 2, we're bucking the trend, the conversation that, The Leftovers is the saddest show on TV. It's like, actually, at the same time, it's deeply funny and like specific and weird. And I think that Maureen Ryan really like hits a lot of those points well here.
Yeah. Do you think it feels, I was sort of skimming through also AV Club scores for the different episodes of seasons 1 and 2. It's a mix of mostly Joshua Alston, it looks like, or some other people. Sonia Soraya was doing reviews in season 1. But season 2 is more, I think, universally well received by critics. I think International Assassin is a part of that. The Move to Miracle is a part of that. Do you feel that sense that like the height of The Leftovers, at least of what you've seen, is season 2?
Absolutely. I think watching it again, I like came to appreciate things in season 1 more, like Two Boats on a Helicopter and the episode with the baby Jesus. I'm like, damn, the show is going for something in its infantile stage that I really appreciate. Because I read this piece a while ago from Emily St. James that I don't have up, but where she was talking about how like the second season of TV shows tends to be their best, but that doesn't mean that the first season is bad. And like, I love season 1 of The Leftovers because you get to watch the show figure out what it wants to be. And that's how TV works. Like it's not a movie. It is in week to week being filmed. They're learning how to make TV. And you don't get that in any other medium. That's something I just really, really love. Twin Peaks season 1, while really awesome, is also kind of a mess in like all over the place. So like, yeah, from some sort of objective perspective, yes, season 2 is a much better season of The Leftovers, but it works because you know how far they came. If you just like came to the show and it was like, hey, here's this family, they're kind of effed up, but like they're gonna go to Jarden and hopefully things work, you're like, okay, good luck, I guess. I don't know why I care about Kevin in the cinder block, or I don't know why I care about Nora being there.
Right.
Like it works because it's coming after something else.
Yeah. And Maureen Ryan makes a point in the piece where she says, each time I've watched an episode during the last few weeks, I've come away thinking it was the best episode in the show's short history. And it feels like that's aligned with what you're saying, that like they built up a lot of steam over the course of season 1 and season 2 to get to episodes like International Assassin or Lens or things like that in kind of mid to late season 2.
Yeah, it's momentum. At the end of the day, that's like one of the best things about TV, and The Leftovers builds its momentum quicker than a lot of other shows do. Like I said, I do think that season 1 is really good and has amazing moments, but there are parts in season 2 that I'm literally going to think about for the rest of my life. I just can't not get them out of my head.
Definitely. I had kind of two things to bridge us into season 3, if you're interested in kind of wrapping with the articles.
Definitely. Heck yeah.
So the conversation that I listened to on the Following the Leftovers podcast, first of all, there was, I think this ties into the earlier point about COVID, there was a sort of side thing where one of the hosts was like, people ask me, help me understand The Leftovers. And I tell them, like, maybe you just haven't had like a personal experience with loss or whatever. And it's like wild to think about, everybody now would be like, oh, it's a COVID show. But they had a lot more to say about, I think they maybe have backgrounds as being formerly more religious or maybe even evangelical folks. And they had this conversation about like the supernatural question in the show. And I think this is something we'll maybe track as we go into season 3, where they were making this argument of like, one of them was basically saying like, there is supernatural stuff it's solved for. And the other was pointing to like, well, Lindelof has put in a lot of work to research like the exact place where Kevin could have been shot, and that's like it's feasible that you could survive a gunshot in the place where he was shot, and like
Interesting.
trying to make points about, you know, this is how religions form, as you see events that are coincidental, but unusual or like seem impossible, and you're like, oh, that's just supernatural. And then maybe The Leftovers itself is a show that's trying to test us into believing things that could be explained through like scientific or rational means.
Yep.
Which was something I hadn't thought about before, because it just feels like we're in purgatory and supernatural stuff is happening. So it's something to watch for in season 3, I think, if they continue to cleave to that desire to like be ambiguous, or if they're just like, nah, it's a supernatural show.
It's a great point. I think season 2, it maintains it. It was done very deftly in season 1, where like any of these things could be explained away easily. But like, let's not forget that even these like godly earthquakes happening in Jarden are probably fracking, are probably due to like severe fracking. And they say it, and yet when the third one happens in the finale, you're like, that has to be something
meaningful. Yeah. Right.
Or if you're Nora and one of them happens and people disappear and you wake up, of course the first thing you're going to do is say, did it happen again? And you're going to call 911 and say, did it happen again? Because like sometimes it's easier. Sometimes it's more comforting to believe that these things aren't systemic, but that they are somehow beyond us and magical, because it provides a comfort that like understanding the corruptness of the world doesn't. And that's something I definitely want to see season 3 tackle. Is like, things are going to keep happening. How long do we keep believing that things are magic before we accept that they are or aren't? Yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to just send you real quick to bridge us to season 3 is in listening to that podcast, I was made aware of something that was going on in 2015, right after the season 2 finale. I was not aware of this in 2015. Maybe you were, because you were more plugged into The Leftovers. Mm-hmm. But there was some question of whether or not the show would get renewed. And so Damon Lindelof told fans, like, let your voice be heard, let people know that you want the show to be renewed. And so there was a fan campaign proposed by Joshua Alston of the AV Club, it looks like, from this Business Insider article that I'm about to send you, where basically they went outside of HBO's corporate headquarters in Manhattan dressed as the guilty remnant.
Oh my God.
With signs that said like renew, and they're smoking cigarettes and dressed in all white and stuff.
Guys,
I mean, isn't this just the most like 2015 shit?
Abso-freaking-lutely. Oh my God, then people taking selfies with the like little renew signs.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I'm both really into this and really cringing right now simultaneously.
Yeah. It feels a little outside of the tone of the show for people to like cosplay the guilty remnant.
To be like, bring back my sad show, please.
Yeah. It's also like not that big of a group of people.
No, I'm seeing 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm seeing like 8 or 9 people here, tops.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I don't want to keep referencing States Journal 11. I know your people are sick of it. All the hate comp. No, I'm just kidding. That shows a lot of that show is about like, hey, art can be there for us when the rest of the world is too scary and can like guide us to live better lives. Right. And I think that people watching The Leftovers, the like small group of us, relatively small group of us who like got the brainworms from this show in 2015, we're still thinking about it because like there just isn't other shows doing this.
Right.
So like I get why you'd be like, can you please just renew this? Can you just do more of this? No one else is going to do this right. And if they are, they're going to do it in a different way. And it's like the power of like TV fandoms, right? Lost is this times 100. You know, the Lost fans were absurdly like rabid and trying to get the show to keep getting renewed and all this stuff, and to its detriment often. But like we talk a lot about the Lost haters, but Lost had one of the most passionate fandoms because it spoke to something that people felt, which is like a sense of isolation in the world and a sort of fantasy about what it would be like and what would stay and not stay in your life if you landed on an island. So this to me is pretty sick. But yeah, at the end of the day, I do agree with Maureen Ryan that the show got great in season 2, but it's sort of like the Newsroom season 1 episode 1. Like, it was a great place and it can be great again. I'm canceled for that one, folks.
You want to read us the summaries of what we're watching next? Well, in 2 weeks, I guess.
Yeah. So
When
come
we
back
start
in
season 3.
2 weeks from now, folks. We'll be watching season 3 of The Leftovers, episodes 1 and episode 2. Episode 1, The Book of Kevin. 3 years have passed since the GR invaded Miracle. Kevin works as a cop again. Rumors rise that the 7th anniversary of the sudden departure will bring an apocalyptic catastrophe. Oops!
Okay. Time jump, and it's the apocalypse now. I love it.
That's the Trump thing. That's like, we've been in it for too long. We're going to have to turn the world off. I found it.
Yeah.
Season 3 episode
Wait, so if there's a time jump, we hit the 4th anniversary, right?
Yeah.
So
the Jordan one was the 4th anniversary, yeah.
Yeah. So that means this season is set in 2018. Is that right?
Wait. Event happened in 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Yeah, 2018. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Season 3, episode 2. Don't be ridiculous. Nora travels to St. Louis in her role as an investigator for the Department of Sudden Departure. Nora episode. Let's freaking go. What's she up to?
See it.
Probably really sad and not doing well. Oh, yeah. That's what I'm here for.
Can't wait.
I'm like that writer. I'm just like, I want to see my friends suffer because I suffer sometimes. I think that brings us to a close for this week, folks. I hope you enjoyed this sudden departure from our usual format.
Oh my God.
I'm proud of myself on that. John, where can people find you on the podcast sphere?
You can find me on another program called Super Smash Echoes, which is a monthly video game book club podcast that I host with my friend Justin, where we play games that are related to the Super Smash Brothers franchise in some way. And this coming month, you'll hear us do an episode on F-Zero GX with a special guest. So that'll be fun. Ooh. Super Smash Echoes. Alan, what about you?
I can be found on the Hunters Quorum, which is on scanlinemedia.com. That's a podcast where my friends and I watch. It's my friends and I play the Monster Hunter games, and we talk about them, why we love them, and specifically we zoom in on the monsters of the franchise and what makes them unique, weird, creative, gross, exciting, etc. On that same feed is a Pokemon ranking podcast called the Johto Quorum, which is our previous season. That'll be coming back, of course, when there are new Pokemon games in November, so stay tuned if you like Pokemon. We talk about them there too. And with that, folks, it's time for the plug zone. Just briefly, if folks are interested in hearing what we got. Magellan, I will take this, if you don't mind.
Go for it. Thank you.
If you'd like to email us questions, comments, concerns, that is over at chatspod@gmail.com. We love getting your emails. We're also on Twitter at chatspod, CHATZPOD is the spelling there. We are our chatspod on Reddit, where we have community-run content, all sorts of fun stuff over there. If you like the podcast, consider rating us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or your other podcast platform of choice. It takes no time at all, and it helps support the show in a big way. If you have the financial capacity, please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/chatspod. That is where you get all sorts of bonus content for your support at $1, $3, and $5 a month. $1 a month gets you a solid smattering of excellent content like movie commentaries and pilot discussions and all that good stuff with John's X-Files podcast. $3 gets you all of our bonus content, including our backlog, which has now been running for about 4 years, believe it or not. And $5 a month gets you all of that, in addition to being thanked at the end of every main feed episode of Chats. So our $5 patrons as of today include Stefan, Six, Fendon, Nick and Pat of the Brothers at Infinite War, Michael, Marin, Marcus, Magellan's mom, Lee, Kat, Jen, and Arthur. Thank you all for supporting Chats, a television podcast. We love and appreciate you very much. Chatspot.com is the website to find all things Chats, a television podcast. And if you like our podcast art, it was done by Camilla, who can be found at Camillastrator on all the social media platforms if you're interested in potentially hiring her to do work for you. If she has commissions open, I don't know how art works. Anyways, thank you, Magellan, for being the article reader to my article reader. We're both reading articles here and talking about TV shows, and I appreciate that about you. And thank you, dear listener, for listening to this episode of the Chatzovers. Peace.